It facilitates connection with other people. I think as you learn a language, you're also kind of obligated to learn the culture that goes along with it in order to effectively learn it. And I think, just understanding family situations, things in Spanish that don't exactly make sense in English, things like that, I think it just makes connection so much easier.
It's learning the culture, the idioms, the cultural frameworks, and your role as a translator is not just to bridge the language barrier, but also the cultural barrier.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week, on Speaking of Language,
student leaders from Cornell's Language Expansion Program and Translator-Interpreter Program join us to discuss the services and benefits of their organizations and how you can get involved.
Welcome to a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelica Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's media manager. Today, we will hear about the work of two of Cornell's student organizations, the Language Expansion Program and the Translator-Interpreter Program.
Both student orgs are now officially part of the LRC.
Yay!
Hooray! And we are so excited to continue supporting their missions. Welcome to Speaking of Language, Grace, Drew, and Matthew.
Hi, nice to be here.
It's very nice to be here.
Hi.
So, Grace and Matthew, you are two of the co-presidents of TIP, the Translator-Interpreter Program. We had previous TIP e-board members on our podcast in Season 5 back in 2020 who talked about the history of TIP, but please remind our listeners what TIP does and what each of your roles are in the organization. Matthew, why don't you get us started?
So, Translator-Interpreter Program, well, as he had already introduced us, Grace and I are both co-presidents. We also have another co-president because we're quite a large organization now. But we train multilingual and bilingual Cornell students on campus to serve as volunteers or volunteer interpreters and translators in emergency and non-emergency situations. We have a really long spiel that we give to students on campus, so kind of trying to paraphrase there. But it's a really cool organization. We work with a lot of community agencies and Cornell departments to translate their flyers, materials, educational stuff. And then we also send interpreters out to cases like, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. We have a Cornell Botanic Gardens case right now that we're actually doing in the very same room. We're reading the audio guide in Spanish and Mandarin for when we have families come that speak those languages.
Yeah, we do a variety of cases ranging from some serious emergency situations. Originally, our program was, in our early years, there was a mass shooting, and TIP was able to send a bus load of volunteers to go and help with the situation. So we do serious situations like that to more everyday things like food bank flyers and parent-teacher conferences. So we're really glad we're able to help with the community and address language barriers because, Cornell is a campus that has students coming from all over the world, students who come from many different cultural backgrounds. So we're glad we're able to, leverage this diverse campus to do something that helps the community in a very targeted way.
Absolutely. And of course, you're not only TIP co-presidents, but students at Cornell as well. What year and major are each of you?
I'm a senior now, so this is my last semester.
Boo.
And I'm studying plant sciences. So a little bit, kind of a disconnect there, but there's actually a lot of Spanish speakers in agriculture, which my family speaks Spanish back at home. And so I wanted to kind of do more of that work on campus because I'm not out on the fields when I'm in class. So can't really speak to these people otherwise.
Yeah, I'm a junior studying industrial labor relations. At home, I speak Mandarin with my family. My parents are immigrants from Taiwan. I actually can't write, but I can speak pretty fluently. So yeah, that's my language connection.
Awesome. Fantastic. So, Drew, you are the co-president of LEP, the Language Expansion Program. We have also featured LEP previously on our podcast. This was back in 2018. It was actually my first season of the podcast. So what does LEP do and who are you?
Yeah, so I'm Drew. Like you said, one of the co-presidents of LEP. I am a senior studying biology and society.
Boo, boo. We don't like it when students graduate.
I'm sorry.
We do. We do.
How dare
but
you grow, learn, and
I know,
be
and
honored
move
for your
on.
success?
I know.
Yeah, and well, the language expansion program is a program that basically gives an opportunity, gives an environment where students can practice languages that they're learning, and it's a very low stress environment. One of the things I think that makes us different from a lot of other organizations or ways of learning and practicing languages on campus is that we're a very low stress environment and we have no formal instruction. So in a lot of language classes, you're going to be reading textbooks, you're going
Right.
to be listening to a professor, doing exercises, fill in the blank, write an essay, things like that. At the language expansion program, we do things totally different, and we basically sit around a table, depending on the language that you'd like to learn, and we just have a casual conversation among learners, among natives. There's no instruction, we're not writing words on a board or anything. We're just talking about whatever we'd like to talk about. And I find that it's really helpful, and it gives people the confidence to be able to speak the language instead of, being afraid of making a mistake.
Right.
Things like that, yeah.
Wonderful.
So this question is for all three of you. What drew you to these student organizations? What was it that excited you about being a part of these?
I can start. My mom's from Chile and has always worked in Spanish journalism. So growing up, she worked at CNN Español and then is now a translator at the CDC. And so a lot of my life growing up was seeing her doing that work and then also looking over her emails in English, translating things for her as well. Not as much anymore because she's really, really good at English because she's been here for so long. But I came on campus and wanted to continue doing that work. I didn't really get involved in any organizations my first 2 years I was here, but then I joined a Spanish conversation hour with Olivia Ochoa, who's the previous co-president for TIP. And she told me, I think you should look into this program because it means a lot to me and I think you would really like it. And I applied to be on the board and I've been doing that ever since.
Awesome.
Yeah, when I first got onto campus, I don't think language was anything I was particularly interested in ever before, but I was just fresh on campus and looking for organizations to join. I really wanted to help the community in some way, but there's so many ways to do that. But I went to Club Fest and I found about TIP, and the people tabling there were so kind. And I went to the volunteer training session and started learning more about the organization and was really impressed at how targeted and organized it was. Like all the years of TIP e-board members, they've made a really strong infrastructure in the program. The operations are very organized, so it really impressed me how the TIP was doing something that was very tangible in an organized way, and I knew I wanted to be part of it. So once I was part of it, I started learning more about language issues, and I already had some connection to language issues. I realized growing up, I was often translating for my family, helping them write stuff. So I was already kind of familiar with that. But yeah, I was really impressed with TIP, and that's what drew me to it.
Nice.
And as for me, in contrast to a lot of the members of TIP, I'd say I don't really have any family ties to other world languages. I have been learning Spanish for quite a while, and that is, my interest in Spanish is really what brought me to the language expansion program. I initially started learning Spanish in middle school, and I took classes for years, and I felt like I wasn't improving in the way I wanted to be improving. I think a lot of the exercises that are done in school in the United States promote a certain type of understanding of language, especially written language and things like that. And I was more interested in having conversations, in engaging with the people, things like that.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
My formal education wasn't really getting me where I wanted to be. So I started I started learning Spanish by myself. I definitely noticed a big improvement in my classes when I started doing that, and it became a hobby for me. It became, over the years, it became a really serious interest for me.
That's awesome.
And when I got to Cornell, I wanted to continue improving my Spanish. And when I got here initially as a first-year student, I wasn't exactly sure where I would find those opportunities.
Sure.
And I was at Club Fest, and I found the language expansion program, and it really encompassed everything I was looking for in a student program here at Cornell. It was one of my biggest interests at the time. Learning Spanish, practicing Spanish, and really practicing the things that were most important to me.
Yeah.
Engaging with natives, things like that. While I think it's important, I would often, when I would be writing an essay in class and thinking, if I find a Spanish speaker on the street, is this skill directly applicable?
Yeah.
Things like that.
Sure.
And that's really how I got into it. I started coming to the language corners, the little meetings we have to practice languages that we're learning every week. And I started going very often. I kind of fell in love with the program, and the people there are just so kind and supportive. Yeah. And that's really how I got involved. Eventually, I became part of the board and part of managing the program. But it's just been a pleasure to be a member and for all these years.
Yeah. Why are the services that TIP and LEP provide important? And think about why they are important to you personally, to students in general on campus, the opportunities on an e-board, the community at large, the volunteers. Why? Why do you do the work that you do?
We kind of brand ourselves for wanting students to use their language skills that they already come to Cornell with to do something more with that. Unfortunately, also maybe fortunately, a lot of us who are here at Cornell have done a lot of community service work before coming here, just because admissions, that's the way it works.
Sure.
Regardless of whether you're interested in it or not, it's kind of you have to do it. Not to say that we want those students, but that a lot of people, they come to college and then there's kind of this gap where in high school you're being handed all these community service sort of things to do every single week, every weekend. And here it's a little bit harder. You have to go out into the community and that sort of thing. And a lot of families, especially first-gen students here at Cornell, who grew up speaking another language at home already have, are familiar with the type of work that we do. And they know how important it is because they've seen how their family benefits from their own understanding of both languages.
Yeah.
They want to continue doing that work for other people, for families that otherwise wouldn't be able to access these services. We mostly serve nonprofit organizations, so organizations that if we weren't in this area wouldn't have the funds to be able to pay for a professional translator-interpreter.
Right.
These families would just not be able to engage. So like I had mentioned earlier, the early child developmental programs to help immigrant families come in and acclimate and make sure their children are hitting milestones in a language that the parents may not know. And then also those parents who immigrated to the U.S., their grandparents or the grandparents of the children aren't here to be able to tell them it's fine. You were just like this when you were a kid. They're completely new to child milestones, all that sort of thing. And so they're not sure should my kid be speaking in English this early on, that sort of thing. How do I know if he's saying it correctly? And so that's where our interpreters and translators can step in and help bridge those connections. And that's what we call it, is bridging the language barriers that exist here in Ithaca.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I think LEP really, it's a step in getting towards the goals that TIP has as well. I mean, I really believe that language facilitates connection, and I think language education is a really crucial part of that. Being able to have opportunities to, lots of natives come to the conversation hours that, the language corners.
Same difference.
The language corners.
Similar.
That LEP hosts, and they talk about their culture, they talk about their family, they. I think that, having a space where we can, discuss discuss things and improve language is really a step into, facilitating that, deeper understanding of people and eventually being able to do the things that TIP does. I know a lot of members of LEP. They've worked on languages they're learning for many years, and LEP has been a big part of that. And now they're at a very high level where they can go back into their communities and converse with people that they couldn't converse with before. They can make those connections that they weren't able to before. And I really think that LEP is a really crucial part of that here at Cornell.
Yeah. Grace, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think what these two organizations are doing are really great. Like, I think TIP, I'm really glad that it provides free services so that community partners have a reliable source of translation services they could go to. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to get these services. And, translation services, it means a lot. And we're always glad to have LEP whenever we have volunteers here who aren't quite at the level where they can become a certified volunteer. LEP is a great resource for them to practice their skills. So, yeah, I think language is a beautiful thing. And what these two organizations are doing is really great for the campus and the greater community.
Yep, I can only second that or fourth that, I guess.
And I'll just say, like, one of the coolest things that I really enjoy about having conversation hours or anything else with other Spanish speakers is noticing dialect differences, which I'm sure is the same for other languages as well. But it can show up in some pretty funny moments. I remember talking with Olivia. They brought up, like, oh, what's your favorite foods? Like, that sort of thing. Somebody said, oh, torta is my favorite. I'm like, oh, my God, that's one of my favorites, too. It's like, oh, what do you like on yours? Well, I like ham and cheese. And I'm losing my mind because I'm like, okay, torta for me is cake. At least that's what it is in Chile. But then in Mexico and a lot of other Central American places, they're sandwiches.
Sure.
So it's like, okay, we're thinking of two completely different meals, different times of day. I would never want ham and cheese on my torta.
Okay, but hang on. You can eat cake any time of day.
Who doesn't love a nice, savory, fluffy cake with ham and cheese? Yeah, that's fun. Well, so, I mean, so many great things to be said about these organizations. How can interested students become involved?
You can come to our language corners, which are hosted at the Language Resource Center every Friday, or almost every Friday, from 4:30 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. And you can also look us up. If you Google Language Expansion Program, you will find our campus groups where you can join. And our website, our campus groups website, has all the information about our meetings. It'll have the dates of the meetings, the times, the locations, things like that. Those are really the biggest things we do, but we also have other things. With TIP, we're actually hosting Language Summit, which is a big collaborative effort between us both, where it has a lot of activities to do with languages, for language enthusiasts, for, people who are interested in translation and, just learning languages in general. And this semester we are also thinking about having many social activities that we have plans for the members. So really cool things coming. But the biggest way you can get involved is by just coming to the Language Resource Center on Friday afternoons and coming to talk with us.
Woohoo! Absolutely. Yep.
That's exciting. To join TIP, student volunteers, they would first attend a volunteer training session. It's 1.5 hours, therefore, throughout the semester. Then the next step is you take a brief certification exam with a professor just to make sure you have the language abilities. And then after you pass and you fill out the volunteer paperwork, you are added to our database and you can start accepting cases. You can find us on Instagram at Cornell Tip, and you can also email us at translator@cornell.edu.
So, Drew, you just mentioned some of the things that are on the horizon specifically for LEP. Are there any other things in addition to the Language Summit where the two organizations collaborate that's on the horizon for TIP?
Yeah, we'll be having a We have G bodies throughout the semester that are for anybody that's interested in engaging with the work that we do, regardless of whether you're a volunteer or not. And at our second G body or general body meeting, we'll be having a translate-a-thon. So any student that's interested, regardless of whether they're certified or not, we have a couple of documents from some really cool agencies in Ithaca and a couple on campus, actually, where you can use whatever language that you're familiar with, regardless of whether you're fluent or not, and translate the material. And hopefully you'll see it around campus and seeing it in Ithaca and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I've walked around into greater Ithaca area. There's a what's the ice cream place in Dewitt Mall called? I don't remember what it is, but they had a flyer up that we had translated.
Oh, cool.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah, nice.
Cayuga Creamery.
Yes.
One of my favorites.
Well, and actually, Matthew, you mentioned this earlier, the work that you are doing right now with the Botanic Gardens, where you are recording things in here, too. And that's actually going to be an upcoming podcast episode as well, so people stay tuned for that. Grace, do you want to maybe mention the plans of TIP to eventually broaden the horizon?
Yes, that is so exciting. So, TIP expanding nationally has been a conversation that has been had for a long time, and we want to expand nationally for several reasons. First, the selection of languages on campus is limited, so sometimes we get cases requesting a certain language. Maybe it's a smaller niche language, and we don't have volunteers for that language, or we do have volunteers, but we don't have a faculty partner to certify them. So this is really unfortunate when we have to deny a case just because we don't have the capacity for it.
Yeah.
So we're hoping with nationalization, we can eventually long-term partner with faculty from other campuses who may have languages that we don't have, so that students can be certified in those languages, as well as we can exchange students who are certified in different languages. For example, if we need a language that we don't have a volunteer for, but another university does, we can kind of borrow their student and we can have this broad resource sharing network. So that's a long-term vision we have. We think that will be really beneficial to improving our capacity to handle cases. But of course, this takes a lot of time, and we're making progress right now we've met with UT Austin and meeting with a couple of other universities to talk about our plans, tell them about what TIP is, and we've gotten a lot of interest from other schools of wanting to start something like TIP. So right now, the first step we're doing is making a handbook of all our positions, all the processes and operations of TIP, so that we can provide a resource to students and other schools who are interested in starting something like TIP, so they have something to look at and know to how to start this organization, because it is a lot to start, but we're hoping this resource can be helpful for them.
And I have to say, I am constantly impressed by all the e-boards, particularly, of course, all the co-presidents. For both of these organizations, the work that you do, the dedication that you show to this extracurricular activity is really wonderful. I really appreciate that all of you take the time to put in that effort and to highlight the importance of multilingualism and multiculturalism. So thank you for making Cornell a better place.
Amen. Maybe you'd like to talk about what's the benefit of speaking another language and being culturally competent. What would you tell another student or a friend why they should learn a language?
Well, one of the biggest reasons, like I've mentioned before, is I really think it facilitates connection with other people. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with someone and maybe they're a little shy, a little closed off or something, and then we realize that we both speak Spanish and they just open right up.
Right. Yep.
I think it also allows you to understand so many nuances of culture,
Sure.
things that you wouldn't understand before. I went to a school. My elementary school, my middle school, and my high school both had a pretty significant number of Latinos there. And, as I learned more and more Spanish, I think I had a bit more understanding of,
Sure.
things they were talking about, of course. But, I think as you learn a language, you're also kind of obligated to learn the culture that goes along with it in order to effectively learn it. And I think, just understanding, family situations, things in Spanish that don't exactly make sense in English, things like that. I think it just makes connections so much easier. And it's fun, it's so fun and it's so cool to, realize that, you have the same ability as somebody else. You can speak their language. I think, when you say that literally, speaking someone's language, it means it figuratively as well. As well. You speak their language, you understand what they're saying, but you really understand it. You feel how they feel. And I really think it's a really cool thing. It's really important, and I think it's something that everybody should give it a try. And for a lot of people that are very interested, dedicate a lot of time to it. I really think it's a really good investment.
Wonderful.
Yeah, this reminded me of a question I got in a volunteer training session last semester. It was a potential volunteer who was asking, now with AI and like Google Translate, why do we need TIP? Why are these translation services necessary? And expanding upon Drew's point, learning a language is not just literally learning the language, it's learning the culture, the idioms, the cultural frameworks. And in our presentation, we do go over how your role as a translator is not just to bridge the language barrier, but also the cultural barrier. So I think learning a language is important because you understand the culture and you can help bridge these cultural barriers as well. And like Drew said, learning about another culture is a really cool experience.
Yeah, I second everything that's already been said. And especially, people say that your mother tongue is like your emotional connection to the world, and that you can express yourself better and in different ways in different languages. And meeting somebody and then figuring out that you both speak the same language, you just like immediately have a closer connection to them, especially in a country where the predominant language is English. If you both have that other connection in a different language, you're like immediately just best friends almost. And then also just outside of the US, if you ever go and travel to a country, we have the privilege of English being considered a global language, where a lot of people, if you do go travel, you'll find somebody who knows English for the most part. But being able to speak the language of a country that you go to is a completely different experience.
Right.
And you're actually able to understand the people, engage with the culture a lot better than you would as traveling as just a tourist.
Sure. No, absolutely. Very eloquently said. So, Matthew and Drew, this question is more imminent for the two of you, but Grace, we're also interested in hearing what your thoughts are. Do you have any plans for using language after graduation? Will that fit in with your potential career goals?
Yeah, so personally, I definitely do, and it's actually something I'm specifically focusing on right now. So, like I said, I study biology, and I'd like to work in medicine in the future. One of my, biggest plans after graduation is to work as an EMT. I'd like to do that for a little while, and then eventually go to school to become a physician assistant. And just, I think, working in medicine, especially in the United States, especially in the state of New York, and, or in New York City, if I end up there, there are just so many Spanish speakers. It is a really, really useful language in the United States just because of the number of speakers and how often it's encountered, especially in healthcare. And I have encountered that, I recently, finished an EMT course where we had to, go out into the community, and run 911 calls with crews as we kind of learn how to do things like that. And, I've been in situations like that where somebody, has some trouble speaking English, and, being able to speak Spanish really like facilitates that communication. Same thing as, I volunteer in the hospital around here. Sometimes you'll get patients that, where Spanish is their primary language, or they really don't know any English at all. And it's so rewarding to be able to communicate with those patients when maybe other medical providers aren't able to.
Yep.
And one of the things I'm studying right now is medical terminology in Spanish, so that in the future, when I'm working full time in medicine, hopefully, I'll be able to confidently communicate with these patients and explain technical terms and things like that. It's really something that's exciting to me, and I'm really looking forward to be able to use this language in the future.
That's awesome.
For me, since I study plant sciences, my next step now is to get a doctorate in plant breeding. So that's what I want to pursue, is plant breeding. And I briefly touched on it earlier, but agriculture, especially in the United States, most of the laborers speak Spanish, and not even just speak Spanish, it's their primary language. And so my current research and what I intend on going into is doing plant breeding for equitable outcomes, which effectively just means instead of breeding crops for shareholders for more money and that sort of thing, it's to increase the equity that we have around the world, but in the U.S. as well, for these migrant workers or Spanish-speaking workers, or really anybody out in the fields, helping understand what they need on the field, how they interact with growers, helping them with connections. We work with agencies that already do this sort of work, like FarmNet New York. Cornell has its own small farms program where they have Spanish speakers there as well, because there are just so many Spanish-speaking farm holders. And so being able to speak the language kind of opens up another world of research, is kind of a reductive way to put it, but I can engage better and understand and help them out a little bit better.
That's awesome.
Well, I think I'm still in the stage of discovering what exactly I want to do. There's so many things I'm interested in. But one thing I especially want to do in the future is I want to go into law, and there's many populations that don't have as much access to legal representation. And I do think that language barriers play a role in that.
Sure.
In accessing the legal representation you need, or in knowing what rights you have and knowing how to navigate the law. So in the future, I hope to start something like TIP, this model of taking in cases for community service and providing services to people that need it but cannot access it. So yeah, I think language is present in so many industries, so many areas, and there's just so many ways to help with the issue of language barriers.
Fantastic. So these are such great answers, and so appreciative of the work that the three of you do. So much admiration for what you're doing. What you're doing is very important, and I'm very grateful. We're all very grateful. So that said, we're wrapping up here, but before we sign off, we'd like to ask each of you for a word in a language you love, are learning, want to learn, that makes you feel good. Who's got a word for us? Who wants to start? Well, I don't know how good it makes me feel, but one of the words I was thinking of actually, it's just really fun to pronounce. Maybe it makes me feel good when I pronounce it, but it would be ronronear, which means to purr.
Ooh.
Like a cat.
So say that again.
Ronronear.
It is a purring sound.
Yeah, that's a good
That's
one.
awesome.
For me, another Spanish word, actually couldn't just pick one, but I think one of the prettiest words in the language is murciélago, which is the word for bat. And I think one that's just really fun to say is desafortunadamente, which is just unfortunately. There's just so many syllables in the word. It's kind of fun to and you use it often enough. We use unfortunately a lot in English. That
More and more these days.
That it's one of the more fun things to pronounce that you use pretty often.
Very cool.
I think a word that makes me feel good in Mandarin Chinese is xiao babei. I think it means something along the lines of little precious, something you'd say to a child. And my mom says that to me, and I say it to my little brother. I think it's just a very warm, sweet word.
That's awesome. Great. Well, guys, as Sam was just saying, and as I've mentioned before as well, I think the work that you do is tremendously important. We appreciate that you do this every single day, that you put language first, put other people first. And we're so excited to see what is on the horizon and what you keep doing. Welcome again to the LRC family. And thank you so much for speaking of language with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Next week, we'll hear from language learner, software developer, and YouTuber Lois Tallegrand about the best ways for learning languages. Until then,
Auf Wiederhören!
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu.
and follow Cornell LRC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelika Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
Recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.